Around the 1960s, we also began to see the emergence of an African liberation theology. Okay, so this was now within the context of the church. Remember, for close to 100 years, Africa was under colonization. And over that 100 years, a significant proportion of the indigenous African people had been converted to Christianity. But with the advent of Pan-Africanism, there was a reawakening within the African people. And there was this need and this desire for them to yet again reconnect with their traditional African theology, their traditional African religion. So you find that in the 1960s, there was this images of the African liberation theology. So the earliest form emerging alongside missionary and colonial incursions into Africa has been termed enculturation liberation theology. So in the enculturation liberation theology began at around the same time that the Christianization of Africa began. End of the 19th century, early 20th century, there was already this theology that was rising within the African community itself, which sought to eliminate the denigration of African religion and culture. So as the missionaries denigrated African religion and culture, this gave rise to this enculturation liberation theology, which also sought to uphold African religion as an equal religion par to Christianity or any other Western religion. So the second form common to Southern Africa, including Tanzania and South Africa in particular, is Black theology, or simply liberation theology. And this rose to prominence following the rise of liberation theology in South America. So you find that the emphasis here was on the political and the economic dimensions of the struggle against various forms of colonization. So as Black theology took root, you find that even the fight for independence also intensified. So you find that a distinctive feature of this form is a deep sense of the ambiguity of both the Bible and Christianity, seen in each the capacity for domination and liberation. So there was this realization that the Bible can be used for domination, and equally the Bible can be used for liberation. Then the third form of liberal or liberation theology was the African feminist theology, which was emerging out of both the African theology and the Black theology. So it shares elements of their social analysis, but its emphasis is on gender equality. Then the fourth form is relatively new, and I believe we are living in part this fourth form, the post-colonial theology. And you find that we'll get to talk more about it just now, that the post-colonial theology is what is then also informed even our modern day theology. It has its limitations and shortcomings, which I hope we'll be able to also look at. So you find with this proliferation of the African liberation theology, there was the rise of the African indigenous churches. So as the Africans sought to reconnect with their religious heritage, but remember they'd been Christianized for close to a century now. So this gave rise to African indigenous churches. So these were a result of the reflection by Africans on African religions and cultural heritage and Christian teachings. So it was how then can we reconnect with our Africanness within the context of Christianity. So this gave rise to the African indigenous churches. Then you would need to appreciate that the system of slavery, colonization, and apartheid through their laws and attempts at social engineering led to the dehumanization of the African self. So as a result of this dehumanization process, you find that the African indigenous churches then provided an outlay through which the African person can yet again regain their dignity as human beings. So the African was deliberately placed at the periphery of the economic center during the whole period of colonization, which led to serious deprivation. So Africans were forced to live in reserves, in homelands, townships, and other areas designated for them. So the environment in these areas were not conducive for healthy living. It is within this context of deprivation and hopelessness that the AICs emerged. They provided for their members resources to engage with and survive these conditions. So the church needed to address issues of social justice, inequality, poverty, and racism. So with the advent of the African indigenous churches, the call and the fight for independence was even further intensified. So you find that the spirit is the lifeblood of the African indigenous churches, and indeed of the then newer Pentecostal churches moving into the 1990s and then into the 2000s. So it is the source of revelation, prophecy, illness, detection, nature, and the impact of evil, knowledge concerning healing, and knowledge concerning myth and ritual. For us to have a better appreciation of the role that the Spirit played in the life of the African indigenous churches, we need to understand that during the colonial era, you find that the colonial Christianity did not emphasize the spirituality of Christianity itself. Colonial Christianity did not address the issues of revelation. It did not address the issues of prophecy. It did not address the issues of illness dictation. It did not address the issues of evil, the nature and impact of evil. And you find that indeed colonial Christianity did not address the issue of moral and ethical conduct of the believer. Why? Because it would then have warranted for them to begin to engage with colonization itself as a concept and as a practice. So the AICs gave this platform where people could connect with their existence, much like the way it was pre-colonial. And remember, like I said, pre-colonial, the life of the African emanated from their spirituality. So you find that with the African indigenous churches, they began to tap into that aspect of the African heritage, where the spiritual also then began to take center stage in as far as the life of the African was concerned. And it was easy for that to happen because of that heritage, spiritual heritage that we had as Africa going back to pre-colonial colonization.